Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me today. A couple of weeks ago, I started a new series on this show called Rising Political Stars. It's a series in which I bring on rising Democratic candidates to basically promote themselves, to discuss their campaign initiatives, and gain insight into why they're running for office. Well, today we have another special guest. Her name is Courtney McClain. And I'm very excited for this interview. If you can't already tell, this is a story of fearlessness, leadership, and grassroots community organizing. The story actually starts about a decade ago, in 2012. It was a former Spartanburg County detention officer that filed a lawsuit against the sheriff of that county, alleging racial discrimination within the sheriff's office, and that he was wrongly terminated because he exposed it. Officer Brian Blalock, who is black, sued the sheriff Chuck Wright and the Spartanburg County Administrator Catherine O'Neill. He accused members of law enforcement of possibly being members of the Ku Klux Klan or neo-Nazi organizations, and that deputies frequently used racial slurs when addressing him. He said he reported all of this to the sheriff and nothing was actually done. In fact, there was retaliation because he got suspended and then fired 7 days later. And another officer who was white basically reported the same actions, and he was not fired, but he got demoted and he still kept his job. When reached by local news, Sheriff Chuck Wright's response to this story was, quote, "I don't tolerate any misbehavior like that. We're grown adults. I can't help what people think when they're not working for me, but we have policies in place and we're going to follow them. If I pick up or notice anything different like that, I'll fix it. I made a promise to the people of Spartanburg County that I was going to do the right thing, and I'm doing it." End quote. Emphasis on I made a promise to the people of Spartanburg County that I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm doing it. So keep that in mind here. So this is a story about racism at a local sheriff's department in Spartanburg County. You know, stories like this emerge all the time across the country. But it's one thing to have a story emerge like this and for the sheriff's reaction to be, I don't know if this is happening in my department. This is happening in my department? Well, we don't tolerate that. But it's another thing for a sheriff to hear a story like this and to instantly deal with it in a way that is considered, congruent with law enforcement standards in terms of if you actually do not tolerate misbehavior and racism in your department, that you actually deal with this. But again, nothing happened. So it was not even a decade later that his office is embroiled in yet another scandal. And it's not about anybody else this time, but it's him directly. It was a high-profile case in which 2 black men were arrested by his deputies. He said, quote, "We had every opportunity to kill 2 young black men, and we didn't do it." End quote. Now, again, to have claimed a decade ago that there is no tolerance for misbehavior and racism in law enforcement, because that's antithetical to what we stand for, and then go on to utter these words, is completely diametrically opposed to what you said less than a decade ago. It's a complete flip. And you might think that people wouldn't notice this, especially if you've gotten away with it for so long or your office was able to sweep something like this under the rug. You might think people might not notice it until they do. And sure enough, in September of 2020, at the height of this controversy, the Spartanburg City Council announces their next upcoming meeting because they are essential for local government, and it's also a chance for local constituents to speak during the public comment section. And it is during this time that 19-year-old Courtney McClain, she stands up, she walks to the microphone at the Spartanburg City Council meeting, and she confronted Sheriff Chuck Wright directly about what he said.
My name is Courtney McClain, and yesterday I started a petition for people to sign, and this is for an apology, a formal apology from Sheriff Chuck Wright. And so far, since noon, it has accumulated 230 signatures, and I would also like to speak. Chuck Wright no longer speaks for the whole community, but for the oppressors within the community through divisive and suppressive rhetoric. Relations between law enforcement and the citizens of this county will continue to deteriorate if no action is taken for our voices to be validated and supported. Since 2005, which is when he was elected, much has changed, and those who are sworn to protect should reflect the change of the community. Sheriff Chuck Wright does not. Currently, he is only protecting those who have the same partisan allegiance to a broken system. He has successfully ingrained fear throughout the community as his reign as sheriff, with many seeing police as people to fear rather than who are sworn to protect. As a Christian, the comment, "We have every right to kill those men, but we didn't," did not reflect anything from the Bible, but rather a show of earthly power. When the charges of attempted murder were dropped from attempted murder to breach of peace, there should have been an immediate recantation of his previous comments and admission of quick judgment. Everyone makes mistakes. Psalms chapter 37, verse 24. But refusing to correct and acknowledge those mistakes brings into question the morality of not only Chuck Wright, but the entire department. Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper. The intentional fabrication of evidence against the two accused men and the ease with which Sheriff Wright upheld these allegations shows his lack of morality and honesty while holding a high-standing position in the community. It seems easier for our own sheriff to fight against the minorities within the community than to fight for us solely because his support lies in the white majority. If we cannot trust our own sheriff to uphold the law, what standard does that set for the rest of the community? We must reform and regain from the grips of racial division and overt suppression, divesting from petty politics, from petty political relations, and investing in reconciliation between the majority and the minority, which is so split right now. Thank you.
That is Courtney McClain. Did I say she was 19 years old there? Again, this is a story about corruption in local government, which a lot of people don't really pay attention to. But she did. And she mobilized and she spoke up and she brought more attention to another case of racial discrimination and vitriol that had been prevalent for years in that department. And so he ended up getting up and walking out of that meeting while Courtney was speaking. But she did not waver or hesitate to continue. From there, of course, things got worse. He was sued again for malicious prosecution and also accused of keeping a hit list of political opponents and ordering his department to pursue retribution against them. He was investigated and then exposed for using taxpayer money on things like cigarettes and Chick-fil-A, along with App Store games, and taking shopping sprees and stealing funds from his own office. He apologized for it and then pled guilty in a federal investigation. When you think about stories of corruption, sometimes, a lot of the times, people think of, corruption at the federal level. You know, the president of the United States enriching himself in the office, violating various laws, including, the emoluments clause. Doing stuff like that, meeting with the heads of foreign state to share up his Bitcoin prophecies. You think of stuff like that, or you think of Watergate, perhaps. But when you talk about corruption and where it starts, where it grows, where it, the root of it, really, you have to watch local news. You have to watch what's going on locally, right there in your own backyard. Because yes, there is corruption at the federal level. But it's also key, it's also important, it's also civically sound and important for you to be civically engaged and watching what's going on in local politics. And 19-year-old Courtney McClain did just that. And this is a remarkable story. I always talk about on this show how it's important to not just watch national politics and what's going on in the national news, but also pay attention to what's going on in your own backyard. Be sure that you're voting in your local races, even if it's the freaking water commissioner. Vote! All of these things directly affect your life. Her activism at such a young age did not stop there because Courtney McClain kept going. She began her political career here in her hometown in Spartanburg, and she basically, again, she saw something that was wrong, she did research on it, mobilized, and then confronted the issue directly. That is the essence of grassroots activism. It is a testament and it is a propeller of some of the greatest civil rights activists in American history. But she did not stop there. She graduated from the University of South Carolina, earning her Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Communications with a concentration in broadcast journalism and a minor in political science. From there, she completed her master's degree in political science at Howard University with a focus on American government, politics, and policy. She has held more positions and titles than you can conceivably count on both hands. Courtney was the president of the NAACP Youth and College Division for South Carolina. She was a page in the State House of Representatives and a summer intern for Congresswoman Cori. She served as an intern for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and was the youngest Black woman in South Carolina to found a lobbyist group, MJL. These are just some of her many accomplishments, which also include a vast list of distinguished awards. Her work on the front lines is both remarkable and inspiring. She is a civil rights activist that has been vehemently opposed in condemning educational censorship and the defunding of DEI programs. She stands firmly against the death penalty, citing the deep systemic racism that is embedded when it comes to how those cases are handled. Her advocacy on that front was highlighted in the case of Richard Moore. She is a staunch defender of voting rights and has expressed criticism of redistricting here in South Carolina, as well as around the nation. I will tell you, as I was doing research for this interview, there are multiple clips and different points about Courtney McClain speaking up at redistricting hearings, and also this interview from back in her time in college on the 1801 podcast, in which she was talking about her going to so many redistricting hearings, but realizing, again, that this is an example, a story of local corruption when it comes to trying to give your party a political advantage and dilute the vote of others, specifically minorities, specifically Democratic voters. She is for gun control, opposing an open carry initiative in the state of South Carolina, as each year we see an exponential increase in mass shootings and gun deaths. When it comes to abortion rights, in a state that is already considered a contraceptive desert, Republicans are incessantly seeking to exacerbate this. In 2023, 5 women known as the Sister Senators, as part of a bipartisan coalition, successfully filibustered and blocked a near-total abortion ban here in the state of South Carolina. They were instantly primaried and several of them lost their seats. And so in spite of that resistance, still, Republicans are at this again. Republicans in the state of South Carolina are trying to make abortion more difficult to access. And not only that, but also imprison women for getting an abortion, but also order that they be put to death for it. Again, this comes as women are already having to prove if they have really had a miscarriage or not. The hellscape we are living through in this country post Roe v. Wade. And Courtney McClain's advocacy for this, in terms of understanding the crisis that we are in and addressing it immediately, she recently eviscerated Republicans for this, again, during that public comment section.
Good morning. My name is Courtney McClain, and I am here speaking in opposition in my personal capacity. At this very moment, nearly 200,000 children in our state are suffering from hunger. Nearly 4,000 are in foster care. We have the 8th highest maternal mortality rate and consistently rank in the bottom 10 of education systems in the U.S. And gun violence remains the #1 cause of death for children ages 1 to 19. These are not just statistics. These are lives. These are families, and these are futures. So let me be clear. S323 is not about protecting life. It's about preserving control. If the sponsors of this bill truly cared about children or the women who risked their lives to bring them into this world, they would be fighting to fix these issues. Instead, these same leaders who defend life are removing exceptions for adult and child victims of rape and incest, attempting to criminalize women and the doctors who care for them, and has the potential to give more jail time to rape survivors who seek an abortion than the man who raped convict her, as less than 1% of cases lead to convictions. Some supporters of this bill have falsely claimed that women are using abortion as birth control while ignoring that this bill simultaneously decreases access to true contraceptives. Women are not using abortion as birth control. They are navigating the hardest decisions of their lives in a system designed to punish them at every turn. And now with this bill, that punishment will become law. We are watching an all-out assault on freedom, dignity, and medical care. So let me say it plainly. Women deserve the right to choose control over their bodies. Doctors should not be punished for doing their jobs. In 2021, I oppose S0001, and in 2025, I oppose S232. And the sister senators may have lost their seats, but they gained a backbone that many in this room do not have. Thank you.
Once again, that is Courtney McClain just destroying Republicans and destroying this anti-abortion legislation here in the state of South Carolina. I will tell you that the next hearing for this is scheduled tomorrow, Tuesday, November 18th. And guess what? It's not open to the public. So, yeah. Courtney McClain, of course, is now running for Congress here in the state of South Carolina to unseat Republican Congressman William Timmons in the 4th Congressional District. A Democrat has not held that seat in over 30 years since Liz Patterson in 1993. But she is the first Gen Z, and she is the first Black woman to run for the seat in its history. And if elected, she would become, of course, the first Gen Z and first Black woman to represent the state of South Carolina in the United States Congress. She recently graduated from the Emerge South Carolina Candidate Training Program, which is a highly influential organization that equips Democratic women with knowledge, resources, and the confidence to run for office and win. I will just tell you, if you do not know about Emerge, like if you're not a political nerd when it comes to all these different political organizations and advocacy, you definitely should check them out. Especially if you are someone that is inspired by the story and wants to run for office, definitely check them out. They are very effective. In fact, in 2024 alone, candidates trained in the Emerge program went on to win over 70% of their elections. Emerge is very powerful. They are very effective. Do you remember the recent blue wave elections that we had in this country? Several of those candidates graduated from Emerge right here in South Carolina, and they won. Courtney McClain is now among the alumni, and she's running for Congress in South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. All right, I'm going to stop talking now. Without further ado, this is my interview with the highly acclaimed, the estimable, the young but fierce and powerful South Carolina Democratic congressional candidate, Courtney McClain. Joining me now for the interview is Courtney McClain, a Democratic candidate for South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. Courtney, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Your curiosity with politics began at a young age. You've described seeing your father watch the news, and it intrigued you to do your own research and develop opinions on critical stories. How did that moment shape you?
I would say watching my dad, of course, at first, I didn't really recognize the importance of it. I thought like it was just the boring news. But as I got older, I really saw that there was an importance behind what he was watching, and I understood why some things would make him more emotional. And once I was able, I would say once I got to high school, that was where I was really able to see the disparities. It really came up when I was running for homecoming queen, and there was a system in place where you could buy your votes. And obviously, we knew that that was going to really benefit the more wealthy students. And that was something that I know that was the first inequality that I noticed. And so, of course, I got some of the other homecoming queens to also speak up about it. And we ended up ending that practice. And we had a black homecoming queen, and the person who raised the most money just ended up getting Miss Fundraiser. I think that's what it was. But that was really the first time where I was able to put into practice what I had been seeing on the news and also the research that I've been doing and actually change a system. And I think, what was I, about 17 or 18 when I did that? So
Wow.
it was, yeah, it was really cool. And from there, I really just continued, especially in college. That was where I really started getting into politics and really practicing what all I had been learning. And once I was 19, that was when it really just blew up in Spartanburg
Mm.
in particular. And then from there, I just kept going.
As you said there, your political journey began at 19 years old after Spartanburg County Sheriff Chuck Wright erroneously mishandled civil rights cases and had a record of making racist remarks.
Mhm.
You ended up confronting him about that in public, in a public speech, in
Mhm.
which he got up and left the room, yet you continued to speak. And
Yeah.
just 2 weeks ago, actually, he pled guilty in a completely different matter related to federal charges, including drug related crimes and
Yeah.
stealing from his office's benevolence fund. I often say on this show that it's crucial that you not only pay attention to your local politics, but that you also vote and you be active. And for
Mhm.
you to do this and to be active at such a young time in your life is, heartwarming and also inspiring. I wanted to ask you, how did you find out about this case and what inspired you to speak up about it, especially when so many, as you've talked about, were quite fearful?
It was really the news was pushing it, and my mom had seen it on Facebook. I wasn't really on Facebook at the time, so I wasn't really connected with the community in that sense. But when my mom was talking about it, and once I started reading more on it, and I really saw also the pattern that the sheriff had had in the past, and I saw how people were continuing to comment on this is wrong, we need to do something. And so for me, I was waiting for an adult to step up and to
Mm.
say, yeah, I'm gonna go speak up about this and tell him my piece. No one was doing that. So this was the first petition that I ever wrote, but I just knew from doing student gov and things like that that was kind of the first step into creating a grassroots campaign. So I went on to change.org and I made a petition, and it was purely asking for him to just apologize for what he had said. And he refused to do that. And so once I got to the county council meeting, I presented the petition and I told them how many signatures we got. And I started my speech, and it's in the back of my video. It's actually still on my Instagram. You can see him getting up in the back and just leaving. And then
Wow.
when if you listen a little longer, you can literally hear like my sister and my family in the back. They're like, "Bye, bye." But that was the first time. And then I mean, just look at how it has come out. He was doing corruption back then, and now he has pled to corruption and fraud charges now. So 19-year-old me was ahead of her time.
And to your point about that, in terms of like local officials becoming ingrained in corruption and becoming just complacent after being reelected again and again, for those who are not involved in paying attention and understanding their local politics, what advice would you give them to get involved, especially in a time like this where we're not just seeing corruption and authoritarianism at the federal level, but also, state legislators and local officials trying to harm the people as well?
I would say just go ahead on and really take the first step. And I would say the first step is researching your community and really understanding what issues matter to them. Something that I do is I go to the county council and the city council meetings and I listen to what people are bringing up during the public comment section. And that is something that is completely free, it's open to everyone. And I would say that is the first thing that I would do because you are going to be able to hear what people are struggling with, what people want to change, and that's directly in your community on a very local level. So I would start there and then figuring out what you are passionate about because activism is such a wide array of things that you can focus on. So really figuring out what your interests are and fine tuning your expertise for those interests, that is something that's going to make you stand out when you do start speaking up because oftentimes, especially when you're younger, people think, oh, it's a young person talking, whatever. They probably chat GPT'd it or something. Make sure that when you are speaking, that you are speaking with confidence, that you have done your research. And over time, the more and more you speak, especially with my experience, the more you show up, the more you speak at these hearings, the more you engage with your representatives, with your local leaders, they will build for you. And the community will also build that respect for you because they know that when you get up, you're not just talking to hear yourself, but you're talking to actually represent the best interests of them.
And as I was doing research for this interview, there were a multitude of speeches going back to early 2020, and then of course 2021, 2022, and 2023 of your activism and continuing to speak up about important matters in the community. And you have a very impressive resume. I mean, serving as the president of the NAACP Youth and College Division for South Carolina, of course, serving in the South Carolina House of Representatives in terms of volunteering there, a summer intern for Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush, the youngest Black woman in the state of South Carolina to found a lobbyist group, MJL. I wanted to ask you about what has being at the center of power for you? How has that transformed you in terms of your political journey?
I would say it has given me so many different experiences. And through those experiences, that's how I've really been able to figure out the type of leader that I want to be. And from that, I know that I am a fierce advocate, especially when it comes to students and really making sure that we have a voice. That was something that really drove me while I was at USC because a lot of students had problems. They had issues that they wanted to bring up, but they were either too afraid to do it or they felt that they didn't have the power to. And so for me, I made sure that I would be at the center of the advocacy. I would be on the front lines, even if I was standing by myself, because I realized that even if I'm just one singular voice, that may bring 10 more voices, and then they bring 20 more voices with them, and we just continue to grow from there. And something that also I found very interesting, just kind of looking back on my experience, was how the university ended up giving me an award for the advocacy, even
Uh-huh.
though I was kind of advocating against the leadership of the school in a way.
Uh-huh.
But they realized that, well, recognized that I was someone who was purely there to make sure that the experience, especially for minority students, disabled students, LGBTQ plus students, that we made sure that we had a place where we felt like we belonged. And that was something that I'm very prideful about, that I was able to create that space. I mean, even today, I still get messages from freshmen at USC who are like, I heard about you and I really want
Wow.
to get more into politics, or I saw where you did a really big protest. How can I do that here? And just really telling me about the different issues that are still going on. And I think being the president for the Youth in College, that also really gave me an insight look to the power of students and to the power of youth, especially when it is used in a very strategic way where we build our coalitions across the state. I think one of the biggest movements was when we were doing the Aim to Rename, and then it ended up moving to Clemson, and then it ended up moving to Coastal, and it became this entire movement where people were calling for buildings to be renamed on their campus. They were calling for the recognition of the slaves who built these campuses. And I think that was something that I was very prideful about, just seeing the coalition build. And I mean, even now, students are still being active on campus. They're still making their voices heard. And so I really think at my 4 years at USC, while of course short, they were also long in the sense that USC needed someone there that was going to push the envelope no matter what. And I wasn't afraid to lose anything as long as I got what I desired for the students.
Mm. You're running for Congress to represent South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. The last time a Democrat held the seat was Liz Patterson in 1993. You are the first Gen Z and African American woman to run for this seat in its history, and if elected, you will make history again as the first Gen Z and African American woman to represent South Carolina in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Mhm.
In preparation for this interview, I was doing a lot of research, as I keep saying, and also I found an interview on the Inside 1801 podcast from your time at USC, in which you mentioned this district. I wanted to ask you here because I found that particularly interesting. Did you always know that you wanted to run for office, and how do you plan to end this 3-decade Republican reign?
Yes. So shout out to one of my best friends, Noah. He was in Student Senate before me, and he saw what I was doing on campus, and he was like, I really think this would be a great space for you. And ever since then, he really opened up the floodgates for me. And I really am thankful that he showed me the opportunity because that was what really locked it in that I saw. Of course, student government is not real government, but
Hmm.
it gave the feel of being able to write bills, to write recommendations and things of that nature, making it to where we see the power that government can have. And also going through the election process, talking to other students, making sure that they know what you're running for, talking to them about why they should vote for you. And that really solidified that I wanted to run for office. And of course, after doing different internships, like paging at the State House, and then I did a little internship at a law firm, a local law firm in Spartanburg, and then going to Washington, D.C., I was really able to see all of the pieces of government, and I was able to draw from those experiences that the size of change that I want to create would be best achieved on the congressional level. And
Hmm.
so once I figured that out, that was when I really started setting my sights on, okay, how can I make sure that with all of the work that I'm doing that I don't have that black sheep type of thing behind
Hmm.
me where someone's like, "Oh, well, she used to say this," but luckily for me, all of my takes have aged very well. And
Yeah.
and I think that being in those spaces and of course doing that podcast, I feel like I kind of manifested this moment.
Hmm.
And I'm very excited to be in this position because I think looking currently at the blue wave that we had on Tuesday, and of course, I'm a politics nerd. I know that when it comes to midterms, the party in power always loses
Hmm.
seats when it comes to the midterms. And when we look at the changes that are happening in Spartanburg and Greenville, Greenville is becoming a purple city. And that is something that we can definitely draw on, especially because the current representative is very absent. No one knows who they are. So it's easy to create a narrative for myself and make myself present and really just kind of move with that forward. And of course, with my activist background, doing organizing, I'm used to mobilizing thousands of people. So that is something that I'm really going to tap into. And that's one of my favorite things to do is talking to people, getting to know them, getting to know their stories. And something I think that people may see when I'm running, especially once we get started in January, is I have so many notes on my phone. And I think sometimes people may think, oh my gosh, she's like texting right in front of these people. But I'm always taking down notes because I always use those experiences to fine tune my own leadership. Because I
Hmm.
want to make sure that I'm not someone who is just representing Black women or Gen Z or just people who have the same political ideology as me. I want to make sure that I'm representing a multitude of demographics within the state. And so moving forward to ending this, I think we have the best chance, especially in this district, especially with all of the support that we're already giving. And once we're able to hit the ground, all of my activist friends were like, yeah, we're going to be there. We're going to be able to bring these people out, push the message, and really use a message of hope and change, and that the status quo does not always have to remain.
That's definitely very powerful and personal. I mean, I feel like a lot of people view politicians as sort of like it's retroactive. They're asking for your vote and they're not actually listening. So to
Mhm.
do that and to be there and intimate with your constituents or your future constituents, that's definitely something that's powerful. I wanted to ask you here on your opponent, Republican William Timmons. He won this district by 22 points in the 2024 election. He has publicly stated that he's for term limits and wants to limit House members to serve only 6 terms. He is currently on his fourth.
Mhm.
He has proudly voiced his support and voted for the Big Beautiful Bill, of course, which, among many things, harms South Carolinians. He does
Mhm.
not live in his district and has not hosted any town halls in person to speak with his constituents for more than 3 years. He was
Mhm.
described on a billboard as being AWOL.
Being what?
What do you make of that kind of abdication of duty, and how do you aspire to be vastly different from him?
Well, for one, I live in Spartanburg. I am in the district. And that is something that I already have an advantage of because I'm actually on the ground going to different events. And I don't have to be on the program to show up at these events. I
Mhm.
actually want to meet our constituents where they are and understand the issues that are driving them and really make sure that I'm building genuine connections that aren't just based on a business transaction or this will look good for me to put on my social media to make it seem like I'm in the district. I want to really make sure that my leadership is not only visible, but accessible. And when you're not willing to have town halls, or the town hall he did have was on Zoom, but it was very people can really say anything. And I mean,
Yeah.
even when you look on the social media, they turn off the comments if they get too many negative ones, and they just make it very hard to reach him. But I think that's also the point because he is intentionally silent on various issues because he knows that his takes are not popular. I mean, if you look at different interviews from the past, if you look at the debates that he's been in, this is not a strong speaker, not a strong debater. And something that I pride myself on is being able to speak at the drop of a dime. I can go up and have a very well spoken speech. And I think that's something that I will use to my advantage because I'm able to maneuver in various spaces in a church, in a professional setting, on a college campus, and really making sure that I'm building those connections. I think that's something that not only he doesn't care to do, but something that he has not done. And I think something that people have also talked about is experience and how I've never been in office and how can we make sure that she's going to do what she needs to do. We've had this representative in office since 2019.
Hmm.
0% of the bills that he has written have passed.
Mm.
Only two of the bills that he has co-sponsored have been signed into law. So if we're talking about experience, what experience does he have? Because it's not only seeming that he is ineffective, but that he is not taking the initiative to really push better bills that would help this district. And of course, we talked a little bit about his votes and just really how they're not representative of the people here. And I think that's something that moving forward, I'm not only not going to focus on his lack of leadership, but I'm going to focus on my style of leadership and how I am able to be there. I'm able to stand in. While, of course, I don't have the power to make that vote right now, I'm making sure that I am positioning myself to where people can see that when I am in office, she's gonna vote for us. She's gonna stand in for us. She's gonna make sure that she not only stays here and is accessible, but she's gonna make sure that our interests are best represented in Washington, D.C., which is something that we haven't had.
I love the fact that you talk about effective leadership, which in a sense has been widely absent when you talk about people who've run for Congress and who've effectively become complacent because they're counting on the fact that they'll just get reelected and that their constituents are not following the track record of what they're actually doing.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk to you about your campaign highlighting initiatives like tackling the housing crisis,
Mhm.
addressing the healthcare crisis, and as well as the high cost of living, and defending voting rights, ensuring stronger schools for every student and improving transportation among some of your initiatives here. Could you walk us through how you plan to make progress on these issues and what specific solutions you would prioritize first?
Yes. So, of course, the four main pillars that we're running on are affordability when it comes to the cost of living, and then, of course, affordability when it comes to housing, and affordability when it comes to healthcare,
Mm.
and then also making sure that we have the proper funding for education, especially public education. So, the main points that we would have for those, and we have so many, so I guess I'll just pick some of the ones that I think that we're trying to translate the best because we don't want people to get lost in the political jargon of things. So I think the easiest one is, of course, establishing a national teacher pay incentive, which matches the state. Because oftentimes people want to talk about having a minimum wage for teachers, but every state has a different minimum wage. So making sure that when our teachers are getting into these classrooms, that they're not having to go into their own pockets for supplies, that they're not having to take up an extra job, and ensuring that those who are teaching the next generation are being properly compensated for that work. And that would be one of the main ones for building a strong school is starting off with those who are teaching at these institutions. And then another one is that this one really was brought to me by what happened in last summer and this summer, where McMaster denied taking up the Universal Summer School Lunch Program.
Mm.
And that was something that I just found very wrong. And I just didn't understand why a governor would agree to let children go hungry over the summer, especially when they had the option to use federal funding to do that. So making it to where it is not an option for someone to deny people the right to eat, especially those in the summer, because when you're at school, sometimes that is the only meal that those children get during the day. And
Mhm.
so when you even take that away during the summer, that is just unreasonably cruel. So making sure that we have a universal lunch program that where children, no matter what their income is, no matter what their background is, that they have the ability to have food on their tables. And that's something that I've been able to actually participate in at my church. We have a program called Backpack Buddies where we come together and we pack 150 meals and we go to the elementary school across the street and we give out those meals to the children there because we know that these children may not have the means to get the nutrients that they need. And we also know, well, also I know just from doing different research that nutrients is tied to good test scores. If you go into school hungry, you are not going to perform your best, which then brings down your test scores. And then, of course, that is mainly impacting our low income students. And then that creates an education gap and also leads to the school to prison pipeline that a lot of low income kids unfortunately fall into. So simply by giving someone food to eat, that can change the entire trajectory of their lives. And I think moving on, I have a lot of other points, but I think moving on to the housing crisis, we in Spartanburg and Greenville, we have been building a ton of homes, duplexes, apartment complexes, and we are doing that in order to really make ourselves seem more attractive to the people that are moving in. But what we're also doing is pushing the people who have already been here for generations. We're pricing them out of their neighborhoods. And so we are creating an environment where we are excuse me, where we are gentrifying our own community out in order to make room for new people to come in. And of course, we want to have growth, but we also want to make sure that we're sustaining affordability for the people who have been supporting these communities for generations. And so by creating affordable housing and tackling this issue, I think we can start by not only building new houses, but using the homes that we already have that are either vacated or the properties that corporations corporations are just holding on to, making it to where these properties will be used to build affordable housing. And I think that is something that I especially love, something that I've looked into, especially with Habitat for Humanity. We have one in Spartanburg and in Greenville, and seeing the program that they have where they ensure that homes that they build stay affordable, or homes that when people pass away, they may give it to Habitat and they're able to make sure that corporations aren't pushing up the prices on the homes. That is something that is being done right is effective, and it's something that I would want to expand on a national level. And then I think one of the other big things was I was researching the RIN report that they just let out. It was amazing. It was a 2025 report on the status of women in South Carolina. And South Carolina actually has one of the highest eviction rates in the country, which is
Hmm.
something that I found very interesting. And I actually didn't even know this before I wrote my policy, but one of the things that we wanted to do was to ban no cause evictions. And now seeing that that is directly impacting people in South Carolina, that is definitely something that I want to continue to expand upon. And then also putting a cap on rent hikes and expanding the right to counsel for housing court, and really just making it to where we are not so corporation centered, but the people who are actually living in these homes centered, because they're the ones who are giving back to our communities. They're the ones who are living here, building their families here. So we need to make sure that they are centered in our fight for housing. And then, of course, moving on to some of the other ones, of course, all of my stuff is on McClainforsc.com. But moving on to, oh gosh, what was the next? The cost of living. One of the biggest things that is driving up the cost of living is the Trump tariffs, and that is why it's currently in the Supreme Court, really talking about the legality of these tariffs. We know that Congress has the power of the purse, and therefore Congress has kind of abdicated its role in controlling tariffs or pushing back on what Trump has done. And if elected, that would be something that I would push for, is using our powers of Congress to not only bring down the cost of living by erasing these tariffs and really pushing back on the legality of these tariffs, but also making sure that we are ending corporate price gouging. And that could be done by passing windfall profit taxes on corporations, especially when it comes to hike prices during inflation that we're seeing in result of the tariffs, if you're seeing the domino effect happening right now. And then, of course, breaking up the food and energy monopolies. A lot of people are seeing that their prices at the grocery store are going up. And of course, that is in response to tariffs, but it's also in response to corporations taking advantage of the consumers. And especially for necessary goods, people are going to have to buy them. And corporations can really just put whatever price they want to. And that's something that I definitely want to end, especially when it comes to energy as well. There is a large monopoly on energy, especially in the South. If you see your energy bill, it most likely has Duke on it. And just making it more affordable for our constituents in the South, I think that is something that is not only going to help us when it comes to not having to pick, and do I want to keep the lights on or do I want to go buy formula? That shouldn't have to be a struggle that people are going through, but they currently are. And so, really ending that corporate price gouging, breaking up those food and energy monopolies, and pushing back on those tariffs, those are really the main three solutions to solving that. And then, of course, we have a much longer platform on that as well. And then I guess what was the last one? Health. So when it comes to health, we know that we were in a 40-day and 40-night shutdown
Yeah.
because of healthcare, and specifically because of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare to some. And that is something that a lot of people are reliant on, especially within South Carolina. We have thousands of people who are reliant on the ACA as their source of health care. And that is the only way that they're able to get affordable care to make sure that they remain healthy and that their families remain healthy. So really making sure that the subsidies to the ACA that they continue to be funded and also expanded and made more accessible. That is something that I really want to push if elected. And then also making sure that people can get paid leave when it comes to welcoming new children, when it comes to their own medical needs, when it comes to caring for a sick family member. Being paid when you have to have medical leave, that is not a universal thing. That is only for certain jobs or certain areas and is not a guarantee. What I want to do is make that a guarantee because you should not have to worry about if you're going to get paid in order to take care of your health or your family's health. And of course, another one would be to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. And that can be done by extending the out-of-pocket cost caps. And that was done under the Biden administration. That was very effective. Of course, now some of that has been reversed, but
Mhm.
we really want to make it to where we pass legislation that also really kind of doubles down on the success of that legislation. And I think what would be another main one under healthcare is ensuring that Medicaid and Medicare is fully funded and accessible. The GOP continues to talk about wanting to cut Medicaid, wanting to cut Medicare, and really pushing a lot of falsehoods on illegals are using the healthcare and people who are lazy and da 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 da. But we all know that the people who are on Medicaid and Medicare, that they are hardworking people who purely just want to get by. They just want to make sure that they're taking care of their families and taking care of themselves. And having good health insurance should not be dictated by your level of income or your background. And so really making sure that we are expanding that access and expanding funding to that, that is something that would be very helpful. And I think something that South Carolina already does this, but something that I would want to expand on a national level is expanding making it to where you can be on WIC for 24 months instead of 12 months.
Mm.
And that is something that South Carolina currently does that I believe is effective because your child, when they are 1 years old and then when they become 2 years old, you're still really while they may be considered a toddler, they are still babies, very much so. And I think a lot of women continue to need that help because that is a really vital time of their development. And so expanding that on a national level, I think that'll be something that not only can positively impact people already here in South Carolina, but also in neighboring states and across the country. So those would be some of the main points for our main four pillars. And then, of course, all of the other pillars, we have 10 different ones. So whatever issue that you're interested in, we most likely have a policy on that.
Courtney, do you mind sticking around? I have a whole bunch more questions.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Every day we're bombarded with headlines, loud, confusing, and sometimes designed to distract. But behind those headlines is a truth worth fighting for. I'm Jeremiah Patterson, host of The Jeremiah Patterson Show, and for the past 7 years, I've committed myself to uncovering what's real, what's right, and what's too often ignored. From breaking news and deep dive investigations to untold stories in history in today's fight for democracy, this work is my purpose. I don't just report the news, I care deeply about it and what it means. But to keep this work going and growing, I need your support. When you become a paid subscriber to The Jeremiah Patterson Show, you're not just backing independent journalism, you're fueling truth-telling in a time of disinformation. You're helping amplify voices the mainstream media too often leaves out, and you're joining a community that believes facts still matter. You'll get exclusive content, behind-the-scenes insight, and subscriber-only shows like the Unfiltered podcast and the Resistance one as well. But more than anything, you'll be part of a mission to inform, to expose, and to resist. I do this work because I love it, I do this work because it matters, and I do this work because it is essential. Because I believe journalism should serve people, not power, because the truth still matters. So if my work has ever informed you, inspired you, or made you think, please consider becoming a paid member today to our website, tjpsnews.com, where you can become a member of the Founders Club for $150 a year, a member of the Press Corps for $75 a year, or a member of the Newsroom for just $7.99 a month. Once again, visit tjpsnews.com for more. When it comes to voting rights, this year we've seen a lot of redistricting cases all across the country. Of course, orchestrated by the White House, in which the president is requesting that Republican states redistrict and gerrymander in a way that favors them and gives them more political power. In a state that is already heavily gerrymandered, you've attended tons of redistricting hearings. What do you make of those efforts to dilute minority votes and silence the people?
I think the biggest thing is that the Republican Party recognizes that Black voting power has the ability to overthrow the systems that they hope to keep in place. And by taking away the Black electorate, you essentially take away Black politics. One of the main things that they have been talking about, especially in the media, is how all of these redistricting efforts and gerrymandering efforts, that they will be directly attacking Black districts and those who have Black representatives. So once we take away that electorate, obviously the leaders in power are not going to have their seats anymore, which then takes Black voices out of Congress, which then allows for them to say, see, they didn't get voted back in. Obviously, this isn't what the people of this district want. But it also shows that the Republican Party is becoming a minority powered party, and they recognize that. They know that they are not the most popular party. And in order for them to stay in power, they have to gerrymander because they cannot win on their own. And that is something that I have not only done my papers on, my thesis on, really focusing on how we can sustain our power within South Carolina through the Black electorate and really being able to harness that power. I think that's something that the Democratic Party is not only really having a problem and kind of struggling to do right now as we figure out what our next message is going to be, but it's also making sure that we're not taking it for granted and making it to where, oh, well, this demographic always comes out, let's go focus on the independents. No, we need to continue to focus on our community because we saw when it came to the election last year that although it was still a minority of people, we did have a larger group of Black voters who decided to vote for Trump. And that was purely because the party has not been really doing the work that it needs to do with the party. And I think specifically looking within my own district, my family lives in a rural area and they've been dedicated, hardcore Democrats since I can remember. And not a single Democratic campaign has ever come to canvass on their door. And that is something that I think is not a unique experience to my family, but to other Black families who now have been pushed into these rural areas. That is something that I want to bridge the gap on and make sure that we are in these areas and not taking those votes for granted and really solidifying as to why they should support not only just my campaign, but the party in general, because a lot of people have been dissatisfied with what is going on. And so I think with the Republican Party, they have been able to strategically use gerrymandering to not only crush the votes, but the spirits of the people to where we don't come out to vote because we think that we don't have the chance to win, but we do. And I hope that once we start hitting the ground in 2026 and really exposing that South Carolina is not a red state, it's a gerrymandered state, and that you have the power to change the course of politics within this district, I hope that we're able to really show that and push this campaign and the party across the finish line in 2026.
In terms of helping people understand the stakes of what's going on at the local and the national level, you've talked about how you are fearless when it comes to going into communities that may have never voted for a Democrat or may not understand your political stances or your campaign initiatives, but making that a priority. And one of the things that we saw with regards to those Tuesday blue wave elections last week was that it was about flipping certain counties that had been red for such a long time and speaking to other constituents that the Democratic Party may not talk to because they feel like they can't win that. With regard to this race specifically in this district, a Democrat last holding this office in 1993, for all races, when it comes to Democrats who are running in places that, haven't had that representation since like the Civil War or going back a century, do you find yourself with renewed inspiration as well as energy to continue reaching out to those communities, knowing that nothing is politically impossible in this race?
Oh, for sure. And that is something as to why I said that Zoran's campaign was so inspiring because his strategy was purely based on grassroots organizing and putting the voices of the people and putting their experiences at the center of the campaign over listening to big dollar donors or to consultants. And that is something that I know we can bring here because I've done it at USC. I've already done it across the state on smaller levels. So if we use that to build this campaign up, that is something that I know we can tap into, not just the typical black and white voters that the party reaches out to, but also our Latino voters, our Muslim voters, our South Asian voters, really making use of all of the demographics that are being impacted negatively by the policies that have been pushed under this 30-year reign, especially within this district. And we can definitely be able to successfully do that because we have people who believe in that. We have people who are willing to come to the state. I've gotten so many comments about people like, I'll come to South Carolina and help. So we have the people who believe in this, and we have the numbers that we can push and really make sure that people that we need to turn out will turn out. And that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to, especially as an organizer, to really see all of that come to fruition in 2026.
One of my last policy questions for you before I get into the official last question is your being an advocate when it comes to abortion rights and for the right to women to control their own bodies. One of the quotes that I found very powerful that you said when you were addressing local officials here in South Carolina a couple years back was, quote, "A century ago, women fought for their rights to vote, and now we're fighting for the rights to our bodies." When it comes to restrictive abortion bans that we're seeing across the country, and just also here in the state of South Carolina, how women who have survived rape or who have had miscarriages are being arrested instead of the person that has, perpetuated such a crime. It's a deeply horrifying time to be a woman in America, especially after the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. I wanted to ask you when it comes to abortion rights, in which you have also received wide-scale praise for, what you believe should be the necessary steps when it comes to repealing these bans and ensuring that women feel safe living in this country.
Well, one of the first things when Roe was overturned was, especially with the NAACP, we were really trying to advocate for the codification of Roe, but I think we are kind of beyond that point to where there's so many different pieces of legislation in so many different states. Everyone has a different restriction on abortion. Of course, some people are now passing total abortion bans, and within those states, we've also seen an increased amount of women who are dying from various conditions related to women's reproductive health. And in South Carolina, 81% of South Carolinians believe that there should be access to abortion within some array of whether 6 weeks or all the way to the end. And so that means that this legislation that they are trying to push through, which the hearing is going to be next Tuesday, and they have closed it off to the public, but we will still be at the State House having a rally. We have really seen that this legislation is not only about controlling women, but it is about the cruelty of this legislation. Because why are we taking away exceptions for rape, for incest, for molestation, for women and children who didn't have a choice in whether or not they got impregnated? Oftentimes people say, well, those who are proponents of banning abortion, they often say that it's being used as birth control and it's irresponsible women, things, da 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 da. But when it comes to women who have been victimized, you are criminalizing them more than the men who did these acts to them. And that is where the real problem comes in. And it also comes in when you are threatening the doctors who have been sworn to care for these women to the best of their abilities. And now you're criminalizing them. You're making women have to go outside of the state when we already have a contraceptive desert in South Carolina, when women are already being faced with lack of access to hospitals. Because of the big, beautiful bill, we have 5 rural hospitals that are at risk of closure. So you're taking away access to contraceptives, to healthcare, and to just making it much harder for women to seek reproductive care in the case that they may have an ectopic pregnancy, or if they're having a miscarriage. And that is something that is just incredibly cruel, and something that I think that is why it hasn't passed these past 2 times, and they just continue to push it through. We know that the sister senators lost their seats, and that was intentional, because now the men who have taken their seats, they are the men that are pushing this legislation. And they want women to get the death penalty for abortions, for possible miscarriages, if they think that it was intentional. And that is something that not only I personally won't stand for, but thousands of women across the state are also not standing for. And I said in my speech when I was talking against the Senate Bill 323, was that I spoke against the fetal heartbeat bill in 2021, and I'm continuing to speak against this type of legislation in 2025, and however much longer they're going to try to pass this piece of legislation.
Lastly, I wanted to ask you about the fearless factor that you have to you, which I found to be profoundly inspiring and refreshing, because that's definitely what's needed in this moment. Of course, your fearlessness, inspired by your unshakable faith and your passion, is a testament to the kind of leader that you already are, and it also is going to play an integral role in your elevation. When you think of just me as like a historical and political nerd, when you think of like fearless woman in politics, you think of Miss Barbara Jordan, Miss Ida B. Wells, Miss Shirley Chisholm, so many officials in government and in civic life. I wanted to ask you lastly here, where does that come from, especially to be so young?
Where does it come from? I think it's just a natural piece of my personality that I've never been afraid to be who I am, and I've never been afraid to stand up for my beliefs. I think all the way back to when I used to do dance, and I was on stage, and I remember one of my friend, mind you, I was probably, I don't even know how old I was. I had to be in elementary school though. And one of my friends on stage at our recital was kind of messing up, and I tapped her and was like, "No, you're supposed to do it like this." And so really, I've known ever since then that I've always been willing to put myself up front. I've been willing to make my presence known, and to also try to help people along the way, because I really think a lot of people have the power of, whether it's public speaking, the power of organization, and they really use it to their personal benefit as opposed to helping their community along. And so especially being in the activism space for 5 years now, I've been able to see a range of activists and organizers and really see how each of them operate in various states and various fields. And I want to make sure that at the center of my activism and at the center of my leadership, the community will always be there. And I think even when you just look at the way that I talk about things, I will never say, oh, I wrote this petition, I started this movement. It's always this movement that we've built, this petition that everyone has signed. I always try to make sure that it's not just me, because while I may be on the front lines and kind of the speaker of the movement, I am not purely the movement. The thousands of people who support it, who push it forward, who really give the movement life, they are the ones who should be at the center. And I really like how that's something that I look back at Malcolm X, at MLK, and seeing that their leadership was always tied to the community. And it was never just about what I want to do, what I want to see. It's about what was the betterment for everyone. And they ended up losing their lives because of that. And of course, I don't want to lose my life. But I will say in a time such as this, that is something that a lot of people nowadays aren't willing to do. And therefore, it makes them scared. It makes them afraid that they may lose their internship, lose their job, lose scholarships and things. But for me, especially at USC as a student, when I would hear other students say, yeah, the administration, they said that they might remove me from my post, that they may do X, Y, and Z, I was always that person saying, well, I don't have anything to lose. They can't take anything from me. And I stood there and I would always speak up for them. And I remember it was even sometimes where people would tell me things anonymously because they were just so afraid of retribution, and I was never afraid of that because I just knew at the end of the day that history is going to look back on me fondly. And especially just seeing me, I've only graduated 2 years ago and people are still talking about what I've done and how they can transform that. And I really hope that in 2026 I'm able to push that leadership, and I hope in Congress that I'm able to create a new playing field for politicians, especially that come from the South.
Once again, my guest is Courtney McClain. She's a Democratic candidate for South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. Thank you again for coming on the show, and Godspeed with this election and getting out there. And I hope to have you back on.
Of course. Thank you so much.
See, I told you she was going to be great. Wasn't that fantastic? Oh my goodness, that was quite an incredible interview. I had stayed up the night before doing like intense research on this interview, going back through like Instagram and everything and finding her different speeches, finding different podcasts that she was on during her time in college, different interviews. This is someone that is a perspicacious leader. And again, going back to the story when it comes to starting with a local corruption case and now propelling to going on to national heights, this is someone that I feel people should have their eyes on when it comes to paying attention in national politics, when it comes to paying attention of ascending from the local level to the national level. And that's why I started this series called Rising Political Stars. So I'm super excited to see where this goes. I look forward to having Courtney back on the show for an in-person interview. But thank you so very much for watching this. Please be sure to check out her campaign, McClain for Congress. And you can learn more about her campaign in terms of her initiatives, about her life and the work that she plans to do if elected for Congress, and the work that she already has done at just 24 years old. Again, starting her political journey at 19. Once again, this is an example of a remarkable, perspicacious, fearless leader that is rising through the ranks fast, and it should be on a lot of people's radars when it comes to the talk about who are the rising leaders in the Democratic Party, who are the rising young leaders just in general. Courtney McClain should be among the talks when it comes to being in that conversation of names. And I feel like she's going to make a huge impact, as she already has, but a bigger, wider impact at the national level as it pertains to getting elected to Congress and being highly effective, as we discussed in this interview. Once again, Courtney McClain, she is running for South Carolina's 4th Congressional District. This was another episode of Rising Political Stars, our new TJPS series. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you again soon. Thank you for watching this video here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show YouTube channel. Please be sure to comment any suggestions, questions, or your thoughts on this video. If you're a fan of the show, please recommend it to your family and friends. You can also support us by donating financially, as this is independent journalism and we rely on your donations to continue this crucial work. Please be sure to subscribe to our website, tjpsnews.com, for free to become a member of the Jeremiah Patterson Show, where you'll be receiving emails. If you want to become a paid subscriber, you can subscribe at one of the options by joining the newsroom for $7.99 a year, the press corps for $75 a year, or the Founders Club for $150 a year, which includes perks such as paid subscriber-only content, as well as to have your name featured on the Founders Club wall on tjpsnews.com. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Remember to keep your eyes open, heads up, and stay focused.